My daughter-in-law held up the microphone. She didn't have to. Her voice, sharp and polished for her online followers, could cut through the thickest summer air. But she needed the prop. She needed the performance. "I just found my sapphire bracelet," she announced, a tremor of manufactured sorrow in her tone. "The one Mark gave me. It was in her knitting bag." Her. Me. The word hung in the humid air, heavier than the scent of grilled steak and chlorine. Thief. That's what she meant. She meant I was a thief. And then the second, more insidious blade. The dementia, you know. She's starting to steal things. The perfect, manicured lawn of Willow Creek Estates tilted under my feet. The laughter from a moment before, the clinking of ice in crystal glasses, the cheerful sizzle of the grill. It all faded into a dull, distant roar, like the sound of the ocean heard from inside a seashell. The world went silent, but my own blood pounded in my ears, a frantic trap drumbeat. All I could see were eyes. Dozens of them. Curious, pitying, judging eyes, all turning from Chloe's flawless, tear-streaked face to mine. They looked at me, Gianna Bellini, a 72-year-old woman sitting on a wrought iron bench by the meticulously pruned rose bushes. Bushes I had specified in the original landscaping plans decades ago. And they didn't see an architect. They didn't see a widow, a mother, a neighbor. They saw a problem. A senile old woman with sticky fingers. A liability in a pastel cardigan. The late afternoon sun was warm on my skin, but a profound coldness seeped into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the ice of absolute clarity. The summer block party had been an annual tradition since my husband, Marco, and I first broke ground here. We'd envisioned it as a celebration of community, of the life we had built not just for ourselves, but for all these people. I used to stand beside him beaming as he worked the grill. We'd greet every family by name. We knew their children, their dogs, their dreams for adding a new deck or a sunroom. Designs I often sketched for them on a napkin as a gift. Now I was a guest in my own creation, a relic displayed for public spectacle. The party was no longer about community. It was about content. Chloe, with her phone perpetually in hand, moved through the crowd like a documentarian of the affluent. She curated life, framing every moment for maximum engagement. Before her announcement, she'd been live streaming, panning her phone across the designer outfits and the catered platters. "Living the blessed life here in Willow Creek with the fam," she chirped, carefully angling the camera so I was just a blurry shape in the background, a prop designated as elderly relative. My son Mark rushed to her side, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. He didn't look at me. Not at first. He looked at Chloe, his face a mask of concern for his beautiful, distressed wife. He murmured something into her hair. Then finally, his gaze shifted to me. It wasn't anger I saw in his eyes. It wasn't even disappointment. It was worse. It was pity. The weary, exasperated pity of a parent for a child who has just made a mess in a public place. "Mom," he said, his voice soft but carrying across the unnaturally quiet lawn. "It's okay. We know you didn't mean to." He was validating her lie. In front of everyone. In front of the Hendersons, who had lived next to us for 30 years. In front of the Gables, for whom I designed the gazebo that now stood as the centerpiece of their yard. He was confirming the narrative Chloe had been so carefully weaving for months. That his mother was losing her mind. That I was becoming a burden. Chloe, seizing the moment, dabbed at a perfectly dry eye. "I'm not mad," she said to the silent audience, her voice breaking artfully. "I'm just so scared for her. It's the little things at first. Misplacing her keys. Forgetting names. And now this. We're doing everything we can. But it's just so hard." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd, all of it directed at the brave, suffering couple. No one looked at me with anything other than that same dreadful pity Mark wore. They saw my stillness, my silence, and interpreted it as the vacant confusion of a failing mind. They couldn't see the silent tectonic shift happening inside me. They couldn't feel the years of quiet slights, of small cruelties, of being made to feel invisible in my own life, now coalescing into a single diamond-hard point of focus. My knitting bag sat beside me on the bench. It was a simple canvas tote worn and soft with age. Inside were my wooden needles and a half-finished baby blanket for a grandchild I would never have, as Mark and Chloe had made it clear they were focusing on their brand right now. Chloe walked over, her movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. She didn't ask. She reached into my bag. I watched her hand, the perfectly manicured nails, the glitter of her other rings, disappear into the soft canvas. She pulled out the sapphire bracelet. It sparkled under the sun, a brilliant accusatory blue. It lay across her palm like a coiled snake. I had seen her with it not an hour before, flashing it for a selfie by the pool. I had seen her walk past my bench, her back to the crowd, and with a movement so swift it was almost imperceptible, slip it from her wrist and into my open bag. I had seen it, and I had said nothing, assuming it was a strange, careless mistake. I was a fool. It wasn't a mistake. It was an assassination. A character assassination, executed with surgical precision. "See," Chloe whispered, holding it up for the nearest neighbors to witness. She probably just thought it was pretty. Her voice was a syrupy concoction of condescension and feigned empathy. The sound of my own breathing was loud in my ears. I felt frozen, a statue in the garden. I wanted to scream, to tell them all the truth. To shout that this woman served me leftovers on plastic plates while she and my son ate from fine china. That she controlled my pension and doled out $20 a week for my personal expenses. That she cut my face out of family photos before posting them online. That this beautiful, sparkling performance was just the latest scene in a long, cruel play where I was cast as the fading, inconvenient matriarch. But my throat was tight, the words caught behind a dam of shock and a sudden chilling rage. If I screamed, if I protested, I would only be playing my part. The hysterical, confused old woman. They would nod knowingly. "See? She's agitated. It's a symptom." Chloe had built my cage so expertly that any attempt to rattle the bars would only prove I belonged inside it. Mark came toward me. He knelt down, putting his hand on my knee. It felt heavy, a brand of ownership. "Mom, let's go home," he said, his voice the one he used for calming a spooked horse. "You've had a long day. Too much excitement." He was speaking to me as if I weren't there. He was speaking for the benefit of the audience, managing the situation, controlling the narrative. He helped me to my feet, his grip on my arm a little too tight. I didn't resist. I let him lead me away from the rose bushes, away from the silent, staring faces. The party was over for me. As we walked across the lawn, I could hear Chloe's voice rising again, accepting condolences and sympathy. "Thank you, Carol. Means so much. We just want what's best for her. You know? It's our duty." My duty. Marco and I had a pact. A promise made over blueprints and late-night cups of coffee. We would build a legacy. Not of brick and mortar, but of integrity, of family, of a life well lived. We poured everything into our son, into this community. We believed we had laid a foundation that could never be shaken. As Mark led me past the Hendersons' prize-winning hydrangeas, I glanced back. I saw a few people with their phones held up, not overtly but angled just so. I was no longer just a neighborhood spectacle. I was becoming a viral moment, a cautionary tale to be shared and commented on by strangers. The humiliation wasn't just here on this lawn. It was being broadcast, uploaded, made permanent. The walk back to the house, my son's house built on the land Marco and I had owned, with the money we had given him, was the longest of my life. Every step was a fresh wave of shame. Mark didn't speak. The silence was an accusation in itself. He was disappointed in the public display, not in the lie his wife had told, but in the scene my supposed frailty had caused. He opened the front door and guided me inside. The house was cool and silent, a stark contrast to the noise and heat outside. Chloe had designed the interior herself. It was all white and gray and glass, a minimalist show home with no warmth, no history. None of my old furniture, my books, or my paintings had been deemed worthy of display. They were all in storage along with the rest of my life. I was led not to a bedroom, but to a small guest room off the kitchen, the one formerly intended for a live-in maid. That was my space. A single bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out onto a pristine white wall. Mark paused at the door. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and his expression softened for a fraction of a second. A flicker of the boy I once knew. The one who used to run to me with scraped knees and stories of adventure. "Just get some rest, Mom," he said, the flicker gone as quickly as it came. We'll talk about this tomorrow. We'll figure out what to do." He didn't mean he and I would talk. He meant he and Chloe would talk. They would decide my fate. More tests. More doctors who would listen to Chloe's carefully constructed stories. Perhaps a facility that was better equipped to handle my needs. He closed the door, and the click of the latch was deafeningly final. I stood in the middle of the small sterile room, my canvas knitting bag still clutched in my hand. The public humiliation was a physical thing. A heavy cloak I couldn't shrug off. The pity was a poison seeping into my veins. I sank onto the edge of the bed. My body felt frail, my hands trembled. I looked every bit the part they had assigned me. For a moment, I let the despair wash over me. The sheer exhaustion of fighting a battle no one else could see. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a confused old woman, a ghost haunting their perfect life. But then, as I sat there in the suffocating silence, the coldness that had started on the lawn began to sharpen. It wasn't the cold of defeat. It was the cold of a forge, burning away the fog of grief and compliance that had shrouded me since Marco died. The humiliation was not an end. It was a catalyst. The shock was not paralyzing me. It was waking me up. Chloe had made a critical error. She thought she was pushing a fragile old woman toward the edge of a cliff. She had no idea that all she had done was push me back against a wall I myself had designed, a foundation I had laid with my own 2 hands. And on that foundation I was going to start building again. Not a house of white and gray, but a fortress. And the war had just begun. My name is Gianna Bellini. I am 72 years old, and my world has become very small. It is confined to the 4 beige walls of a guest room in a house I unknowingly designed, in a neighborhood I brought to life from ink and paper. But before I became this quiet fixture, this ghost who haunts the hallways of her own son's home, I was a creator of worlds. My story, the real one, isn't written in the family photo albums they keep on the coffee table. It's written in the curve of the streets outside, in the angle of the sunlight that hits the kitchen floor, in the very foundation of this house. My husband Marco has been gone for 3 years. The world knew him as Marco Bellini, the brilliant real estate developer, a man who could see a thriving community in a barren field. He was a quiet man with a booming legacy, and I was his secret. His secret weapon, he used to call me. His voice a low rumble against my ear as we'd stand over the drafting table late at night. He was the voice, the handshake, the name on the letterhead. I was the architect, the mind behind the curtain, the hand that drew every line, every window, every shared green space for every community he ever built. Willow Creek, this very neighborhood, was to be our masterpiece, the culmination of a lifetime spent building dreams for other people. Our partnership was a silent, sacred pact. I never craved the spotlight. It would have scorched me. My joy was in the work itself, in the quiet hum of creation. I can still smell the sharp, clean scent of drafting paper, feel the satisfying scratch of my pen on the vellum, the weight of the T-square in my hands. Our love story wasn't written in letters. It was written in blueprints. Marco would come into my studio, which took up the entire sun-drenched top floor of our old house, and he wouldn't say a word. He'd just stand behind me, his large, warm hands resting on my shoulders, and we would look at the plans together. He understood my language of lines and angles as if it were his native tongue. "You see the soul of a place, Gianna," he'd whisper. "I just give it a body." He was the earth, and I was the river that carved its path. We were whole together. When we designed Willow Creek, we poured everything we had into it. I didn't just design houses, I designed a life. I angled the homes on Hemlock Lane just so that each family could see the sunset without looking directly into their neighbor's window. I designed the winding footpaths not as simple shortcuts, but as invitations for evening strolls, for conversations between neighbors, for children to chase fireflies. The community clubhouse, the place where that awful party happened, was my heart's project. I envisioned a place of warmth, a central hearth for the entire community, with a great stone fireplace and wide, welcoming porches. Every beam, every brick was a testament to our shared vision of what a home, a true community, should be. It was our legacy made tangible. Then, 3 years ago, the music stopped. Marco's heart, the one that had beat so steadily beside mine for nearly 50 years, simply gave out. And with it, the light in my world dimmed to a faint gray flicker. Our big, beautiful house, the one with my sun-drenched studio, became a cavern of echoes. Every room held a memory of him, his scent still clinging to the armchair in the library, his reading glasses still on the bedside table. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. The blueprints and sketches in my studio felt like relics from another life. The ghost of a woman I no longer was. I was adrift, a ship without a rudder in a sea of grief. That's when my son Mark and his wife Chloe stepped in. They appeared like a lifeboat. Mark, my only child. The boy whose face I had memorized, whose tiny hand I had held as he took his first steps. He had Marco's jawline but my eyes. He wrapped his arms around me in the echoing foyer of my house and said the words I so desperately needed to hear. "We'll take care of you, Mom. You don't have to be alone in this huge place. Come live with us. We're family." Family. The word was a balm to my raw, grieving soul. Chloe, always so polished and persuasive, sealed the deal. She had found the perfect house, a new construction, in the most wonderful neighborhood. Willow Creek. The irony was a bitter pill I didn't even recognize I was swallowing. "It's like it was made for us, Mom," she'd said, her eyes gleaming. "The designer must have been a genius. Everything is so thoughtful." I just nodded and smiled, my own secret tucked away like an old photograph. It felt like a sign, a way to stay close to Marco, to live inside our final greatest creation. So I agreed. I sold the house that held half a century of my life. I packed up my memories into boxes, leaving behind my drafting table. There was no room for it, they said. It was too big, too old-fashioned. I watched as the moving truck pulled away, carrying the last vestiges of the life Marco and I had built. I handed them the majority of the proceeds from the sale, a sum that would have made anyone gasp. It was for their dream house, they explained. An investment in our shared future. It was my way of buying my place, of ensuring I wouldn't be a burden, that I would be a cherished part of their lives in my final years. I wasn't just giving them money. I was giving them my trust, my future, the entirety of my late husband's legacy. The small nest egg I had left, my personal savings, they graciously offered to manage for me as well. "Mom, you're retired now," Mark had said, gently taking my hand. "You shouldn't have to worry about statements and bills and all that nonsense. Let us handle it. We'll make sure you have everything you need." And I let them. Of course I did. This was my son, the boy I had taught to be honest and kind. Why would I ever doubt him? I signed the papers he put in front of me, his pen hovering over my hand, his voice a soothing murmur about simplifying my life. I was just so tired of making decisions. I just wanted to feel safe. Now I live in their guest room. It's a lovely room by all accounts. The walls are a calming shade of grayish. The furniture is new and stylish. But it isn't mine. There are no pictures of Marco on the wall. My books are still in a box in the garage. My life has been distilled down to this one sterile room. I am a silent fixture in their perfect life. A piece of antique furniture they dust off when company is expected. I sit in the living room they furnished with my money, on a couch they picked out, and watch them live a life I funded. From my window, I can see the community clubhouse, its stone chimney rising against the sky. A monument to a life I no longer lead, a dream I can see but cannot touch. I have become a stranger in the world I created. And until that day at the barbecue, I thought this was my penance for outliving the love of my life. I thought this quiet, shrinking existence was all that was left for me. I had forgotten who I was. I had forgotten the strength in the hands that drew the blueprints. But a foundation, even one that is buried, never truly loses its strength. The cruelty began in the quiet moments, in the spaces between words. It wasn't a sudden storm but a slow creeping frost, starting with the dinner plate. The first time it happened, I almost convinced myself it was an oversight. Mark and Chloe were laughing over a steaming pot of cioppino, the aroma of garlic and tomato filling the kitchen. They had opened a bottle of crisp Pinot Grigio, its condensation beating on the glass. My place at the table, the one I used to sit at with Marco, was conspicuously empty. Chloe eventually brought me a plate in the living room, where I was pretending to read. On it was a slice of yesterday's meatloaf, cold from the refrigerator, with a dollop of ketchup on the side. "We didn't think you'd like all the spice, Gianna," she'd said, her smile as thin as a razor's edge. "This is simpler." Beside the plate was a plastic fork. "Just so you don't accidentally drop and break the good silver. Your hands, you know." She'd patted my shoulder with a theatrical tenderness that made my skin crawl. That became the new normal. Their lives were a curated feed of gourmet meal kits, DoorDash sushi, and artisanal cheese boards, all documented for their online friends. My life was a parade of leftovers, served on a chipped ceramic plate that was designated as mine. I ate alone, listening to their laughter from the other room. The plastic fork became a permanent companion, a constant tactile reminder of my diminished status. I was no longer the matriarch of the family. I was a fragile liability, a child who couldn't be trusted with adult things. The worst part was the performance. They never just gave me the cold food. They presented it with a veneer of concern. "The sodium in our food is too high for you. The fish has too many small bones. This is easier for you to digest." Each excuse was a small sharp stone thrown at my dignity. After my solitary meal, my second duty began. I was the family dishwasher. While they retreated to the living room, the sound of the television a muffled roar, I would stand at the sink, my hands plunged into greasy water. My fingers, once so nimble on drafting paper, grew raw and chapped from scrubbing the remnants of meals I was never invited to share. I could hear their son, my grandson Leo, asking why Grandma always had to do the dishes. Chloe's voice, syrupy sweet, would float back. "Because it gives Grandma a purpose, sweetie. It helps her feel useful." They weren't just mistreating me. They were teaching the next generation that I was an object, a utility. I would scrub a pan with all my might, the friction a poor substitute for the scream lodged in my throat. Soon the physical erasure bled into the digital world, which was, for them, the only world that mattered. I ceased to exist online. A few months after I moved in, Chloe posted a beautiful family portrait from Leo's birthday. They were all there, Mark, Chloe, Leo, beaming on the front porch. I remembered the moment clearly. I had been standing right next to Mark, but in the photo I was gone. A clumsy smudge near Mark's shoulder was the only evidence I had ever been there. An amateurish edit with a healing brush tool that had left a wound no software could mend. I saw it on her iPad, left on the kitchen counter. I zoomed in, my finger trembling. They hadn't just cropped me out, they had tried to paint me out of existence. I felt a wave of dizziness, the kind that comes when the ground beneath you proves to be an illusion. The incidents became more blatant, more cruel. Mark had a moderately successful channel on Twitch, a platform where he played video games for hours while people watched online. His office was next to my guest room, the walls thin. One evening I coughed, a dry, rattling sound in the quiet house. Through the wall I heard Chloe's voice, a stage whisper into his microphone. "Don't mind that, guys. It's just the relic in the guest room rattling her chains." A moment of silence, and then I heard it, the faint, tinny sound of laughter from his computer's speakers. The laughter of strangers mocking a woman they had never met. A woman reduced to a punchline. I sat on the edge of my bed, my body rigid. Mark said nothing to defend me. The game's sound effects, explosions and gunfire, resumed, burying the moment as if it had never happened. But it had. It was now a part of me, a shard of glass working its way deeper into my soul. I was a ghost in my own home, a specter whose occasional noises were a source of irritation and dark humor. The most effective cage, however, was the financial one. Marco had left me well provided for, a comfortable pension that was meant to ensure my golden years were truly golden. But during the transition, as Mark had called it, he had convinced me to sign a stack of papers. "It's just to make things easier, Mom," he'd said, his hand guiding mine. "This way we can manage your bills, and you won't have to worry about a thing." I, lost in the fog of grief, had signed. I didn't realize I was signing away my independence. My entire pension was deposited directly into their joint account. My access to my own money was severed. My life was now funded by a single $20 bill, which Chloe would hand me every Monday morning with the air of a benevolent queen bestowing charity upon a peasant. "For your essentials, Gianna," she would say, her nails perfectly manicured as she passed me the worn note. Essentials. That $20 had to cover any personal items, a bus fare if I wanted to visit the library, a coffee if I dared to dream of sitting in a cafe and feeling like a person again. It never stretched far enough. It was designed not to. It was a leash just long enough to give me the illusion of movement, but short enough to remind me I was tethered to their control. One afternoon, the arch in my left foot was screaming in pain. My old orthopedic shoes were worn beyond repair. I gathered my courage and approached Chloe while she was scrolling through her phone. "Chloe," I began, my voice small, "I think I need a new pair of shoes. These are causing me some pain." She looked up from her screen, her brow furrowed in a mask of deep dramatic concern that didn't reach her eyes. She sighed, a long theatrical exhalation of burden. "Oh, Gianna. Another expense." She tapped her fingers on her phone's screen. A mock calculation of a budget I was no longer privy to. "Your expenses are really getting out of control. These things add up, you know." I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I was a 72-year-old woman, a professional who had designed entire communities, begging for a pair of shoes to ease my pain. I mumbled an apology and retreated to my room, the pain in my foot now a dull ache compared to the sharp agony in my heart. The next week, the sting of that humiliation was still fresh. I was tidying the living room when I saw Chloe recording a video on her phone, propped up against a stack of books. She was beaming, surrounded by tissue paper. "Hey guys," she chirped to her unseen audience. "Look what finally came. I am so obsessed." She lifted a gleaming new handbag from a box, the iconic LV monogram unmistakable. "I've been wanting a Louis Vuitton never full for like ever. I just had to treat myself." She hugged the bag to her chest, her voice dripping with manufactured ecstasy. I stood in the doorway, invisible to her and her followers, holding a dust rag. The price of that handbag could have bought me a lifetime supply of shoes. It could have bought me a sliver of freedom. But it was never about the money. It was about the power. It was about keeping me small, needy, and grateful for the scraps they threw my way. All these moments, these daily grinding humiliations, were the foundation for what happened at the annual Willow Creek neighborhood barbecue. It was the culmination of their campaign, the public unveiling of the narrative they had so carefully crafted in private. The sun was bright, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and freshly cut grass. Chloe was in her element, flitting from group to group, a wine glass in hand, her laughter a little too loud. I sat on a bench under a maple tree, feeling like an exhibit at a zoo. I knew she had planted the bracelet. I wasn't senile, not yet. An hour earlier, while I was resting my eyes on the patio chaise lounge, I had seen her. Through my slitted eyelids, I watched her approach my handbag, which sat on the table beside me. With a furtive glance around, she unzipped the side pocket and slipped something inside. It was her sapphire bracelet, the one Mark had given her for their anniversary, the one she had been loudly lamenting having misplaced all morning. Her movements were quick, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a calculated act. Her performance later was flawless, worthy of an award. Her voice rose in a theatrical wail. "Oh my God, my bracelet. It's gone." She feigned a frantic search, her hands fluttering near her throat. Mark rushed to her side, playing the part of the concerned husband. The search party began. And then the inevitable discovery. Chloe, her eyes wide with feigned innocence, suggested, Maybe check Gianna's bag? She's been a little forgetful lately. She might have picked it up by mistake." A neighbor, a woman named Carol, hesitantly picked up my purse. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper. And there it was, nestled amongst my tissues and my $20 bill, gleaming an insidious blue under the afternoon sun. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Chloe burst into perfectly timed tears, burying her face in Mark's shoulder. "Oh, Mom!" he said, his voice laced with a pathetic, practiced pity. You didn't mean to. The neighbors looked at me. Their faces were a nauseating cocktail of pity, suspicion, and discomfort. They saw a frail, confused old woman, a kleptomaniac in the making, a burden to her long-suffering family. Chloe's masterpiece was complete. She had painted me as mentally incompetent in front of the entire community, cementing her control, justifying her every future cruelty as a necessary precaution. But as I stood there, the object of their whispers and sorrowful glances, something unexpected happened. I felt the 1,000 tiny fractures that had been cracking my spirit over the past year suddenly fused together. The constant humiliation, the cold dinners, the digital erasure, the financial chains, they all solidified. The heat of my shame and grief cooled, then hardened into something new. Something solid. It was not despair that I felt in that moment of ultimate public degradation. It was clarity. A cold, hard architectural clarity. I finally saw the full design of their cruelty, the load-bearing walls of their lies, the precise angles of their manipulation. And in the ruins of my old life, I felt the first stirrings of a new blueprint taking shape. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea they had just laid my new foundation. The laughter from the barbecue still echoed in the sterile silence of my guest room, a cruel phantom that clung to the air like the scent of cheap disinfectant Chloe favored. Each ripple of mirth was a fresh jab, a reminder of the pitying eyes and knowing smiles that had followed me as I'd shuffled back into the house, my son's arm a proprietary weight on my shoulder. Chloe's voice, a high saccharine blade, cut through the memory. Oh Mom, don't worry, we all get a little forgetful. She had played her part to perfection. The concerned daughter-in-law, wrestling with the tragic decline of her husband's mother. And Mark, my son, had stood by, his expression a carefully crafted mask of sorrowful duty. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, the springs groaning in protest. My reflection in the dark window was a stranger, a stooped, gray-haired woman with eyes that had seen too much and said too little. They had called me a thief. In front of the families I had designed homes for, on the very land I had shaped from dirt and dreams, they had painted me as a common criminal, a pitiable kleptomaniac. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold stone in my stomach. But beneath it, something else was stirring. Not despair. Not the final crushing weight of surrender they had expected. It was a clarity. A cold, sharp architectural clarity that I hadn't felt in years. The kind of clarity that comes when you strip a problem down to its foundation, to its essential load-bearing truths. And with that thought came Marco. His presence filled the small, impersonal room, as real as the ache in my bones. I could almost smell the familiar scent of his workshop, graphite, coffee, and old paper. I saw his hands, strong and calloused, moving across a vast blueprint, his finger tapping a specific point. The foundation is everything, Gianna. His voice rumbled, a memory so vivid it was more like a visitation. We were younger then, standing in the half-finished shell of what would become the Willow Creek Clubhouse, the air thick with the smell of wet concrete and sawdust. He wasn't talking about rebar and footings, not entirely. He was talking about principles. About beginnings. Protect the foundation, he'd said, his eyes meeting mine over the plans, and the house will stand forever. For years I had held those words as a loving platitude, a metaphor for our life together. But tonight, in the aftershock of Chloe's performance, I understood. It was not a metaphor. It was an instruction. The next morning, the house was a tomb. Mark and Chloe wouldn't surface for hours, their late nights of curated social engagements requiring long, languid mornings. The only sound was the hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator, a monument to a life of which I was no longer a part. My weekly allowance, a crisp $20 bill left on the kitchen counter like a tip for the maid, felt heavier than usual. It was a symbol of my complete dependence, a measure of my worth in their eyes. Today it was going to be something else. It was going to be a key. I slipped out the back door, my movements furtive, like the thief Chloe pretended I was. The manicured streets of Willow Creek, each curve and cul-de-sac a line I had drawn myself, felt alien. I kept to the shadows of the perfectly pruned maple trees, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The 7-Eleven on the edge of the development was a garish splash of fluorescent reality against the muted, beige perfection of my prison. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and hot dogs. I bought the cheapest burner phone they had, a plastic clamshell device that felt like a child's toy. The transaction was anonymous, a small, defiant act of self-reclamation. Back in my room, I fumbled with the stiff plastic packaging, my fingers clumsy with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The battery clicked into place. I pressed the power button, and the small screen glowed to life with a cheerful, generic tune. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. There was only one number I needed to dial, a sequence etched into my memory from a lifetime of partnership and trust. I took a deep, shaky breath and dialed. It rang 3 times, each ring a lifetime. Vance. The voice was a gravelly welcome from a world I thought I had lost forever. Arthur. I breathed, my own voice a reedy whisper. It's Gianna. Gianna Bellini. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, then a sound like a heavy legal tone being dropped. Gianna? My God, is it really you? I've been worried. Mark told me you weren't up to receiving calls, that you needed complete rest. The lie was so casual, so complete. Mark tells a lot of stories, Arthur. I see, he said, and the warmth in his voice was immediately replaced by a sharp, professional edge. What's going on, Gianna? Are you all right? I told him everything. I started with the cold leftovers and the plastic forks, the insults disguised as jokes, the way they erased me from family photos as if I were a ghost they were trying to exorcise. My voice gained strength as I spoke, the dam of years of silent endurance finally breaking. I told him about the $20 allowance, the pension that vanished into their account every month, and then I told him about the barbecue, about the sapphire bracelet, Chloe's theatrical gasp, and the circle of faces, all looking at me with that unbearable, soul-crushing pity. Arthur listened without interruption, the silence on his end a testament to his focus. When I was finished, the only sound was my own ragged breathing. The vultures, he said, his voice a low growl. I never trusted that woman, and Marco would be heartbroken. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound that traveled through the cheap plastic of the phone. Okay, Gianna. We fight. First things first, we get you control of your own money. I'll start the process of revoking Mark's access to your pension and accounts. It'll be messy, but it's straightforward. A fragile tendril of hope began to uncurl in my chest. Thank you, Arthur. I knew. Wait, Gianna. He cut in, and the tone of his voice snuffed out that tiny flame. I need to check the file. Marco and I were meticulous. There must be safeguards. But I need to be sure. Mark has been your primary contact for years now. Let me pull up your case. Hold on. I held the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard, the rustle of papers. It felt like my entire future was being decided in a dusty law office miles away. The silence stretched, becoming thin and taut, ready to snap. Oh no, Arthur said. The words were soft, almost inaudible, but they hit me like a physical blow. What is it, Arthur? What's wrong? Gianna, he said, and his voice was filled with a grim finality. There's a problem. A very big one. According to the documents in your file, you signed over a durable power of attorney to Mark 5 years ago. The room tilted. Power of attorney. The legal term was a blunt instrument, and I felt the full force of its meaning. What does that mean exactly? I asked, though I already knew. It means, Arthur said, his voice laced with frustration, that he has complete and total legal control. Your finances, your assets, your medical decisions, everything. He can access your accounts, sell your property, sign contracts on your behalf. Legally, Gianna, he is you. Revoking your pension access is impossible. You gave him the right to manage it. The memory hit me then, not as a flash but as a slow, sickening flood. It was a few months after Marco's funeral. I was still lost in a fog of grief, navigating a world that had lost its color. Mark had arrived one afternoon with a thick manila folder and a look of practiced filial concern. He'd spread a stack of papers across the dining room table, the table where Marco and I had shared 40 years of meals. It's just some pension transfer forms, Mom, he had said, his voice smooth and reassuring. It's a real headache, all this bureaucracy. I can take care of it for you. It'll just be easier if my name is on the accounts to help you manage things. You shouldn't have to worry about this stuff right now. I remembered the sheer volume of paper, the dense blocks of legal text that swam before my grief-stricken eyes. I trusted him. He was my son. Marco's son. He had pointed to various lines with the tip of his expensive pen. Sign here, initial here, and just one more here. His pen had hovered impatiently over the page, a silent pressure to hurry, to not ask questions, to not be a burden. I had picked up the pen, my hand shaking slightly, and signed my name where he indicated. My own signature. It wasn't a key to my cage. It was the lock. I had forged my own chains and handed him the only key. Gianna? Are you still there? Arthur's voice pulled me from the memory. I remember. I whispered into the phone. I signed them. He told me they were for my pension. He lied, Arthur said flatly. He had you sign away your entire autonomy. To undo this, we'd have to prove in court that you were either coerced or mentally incompetent at the time of signing. Both are incredibly difficult. An uphill battle against your own son. The phone felt impossibly heavy. The first obstacle wasn't a wall. It was a chasm, and I was standing on the wrong side of it, having willingly jumped years ago. For a full day, a sense of profound futility settled over me. The burner phone sat dead on the nightstand, its brief promise of freedom now just a piece of useless plastic. Every time I heard Mark's voice in the house, a wave of nausea and cold anger washed over me. I had to face him. I couldn't let the lie sit between us unspoken. I needed to see his face when I said the words, to look into the eyes of the boy I had raised and see the man who had betrayed me so completely. I found him in the kitchen the next afternoon. He was making a protein shake, the blender roaring with a violence that matched the tempest in my chest. Chloe was out at yoga or lunch or whatever it was she did to fill the empty hours of her day. The house was quiet except for the whine of the motor. When he shut it off, the silence was deafening. He poured the thick, gray liquid into a glass and turned, a surprised but pleasant smile on his face when he saw me standing there. "Hey Mom, you're up and about. Feeling better today?" he asked, his tone casual as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't stood by and watched his mother be publicly branded a senile thief. My voice when it came was a trembling, fragile thing. "Mark, I need to talk to you." "Of course. What's on your mind?" He leaned against the marble countertop, sipping his shake, the picture of relaxed confidence. "I spoke to Arthur Vance." His posture didn't change, but I saw a flicker in his eyes, a momentary tightening around his mouth before the smooth mask slid back into place. "Arthur? Wow, I haven't heard that name in years. How's the old guy doing?" "He told me about the power of attorney, Mark." I watched his face, searching for a crack in the facade, a hint of shame or guilt. There was nothing. "The papers I signed. After your father died." He set his glass down and walked over to me, his expression shifting to one of deep, loving concern. He put his arm around my shoulder, and his touch felt like ice. It was a gesture of possession, not affection. "Oh, Mom," he said, his voice a soft, pitying caress. "You're getting confused again. We talked about this, don't you remember? You asked me to handle things for you." The gaslighting was so effortless, so practiced. It was a suffocating fog designed to make me question my own mind. "No," I said, pulling away from his touch. "No, I didn't. You told me they were pension forms. You said it was to make things easier." He shook his head slowly, a sad smile playing on his lips. "You were so overwhelmed after Dad passed. You were forgetting to pay bills, you were losing track of things. You came to me and you said, 'Mark, I can't do this anymore. Please, can you just take care of it all for me?' It was your idea, Mom. I was just trying to help, to take the burden off your shoulders." Every word was a twisting of the knife. He was using my grief as a weapon against me, recasting my vulnerability as incompetence. He was taking the truth and reshaping it into a narrative that made him the dutiful son and me the failing, forgetful mother. "That's not how it happened," I insisted, my voice rising. I would never have signed everything over to you. I would never have. See, he said gently, cutting me off. He tapped his temple. This is what Chloe and I are so worried about. Your memory, it's not what it used to be. You're mixing things up, creating scenarios that didn't happen. It's okay. It's not your fault. But you have to let us take care of you. We just want what's best for you. He wasn't my son anymore. He was a stranger wearing my son's face, speaking with my son's voice. I was no longer his mother. I was a problem to be managed, an obstacle on his path to the life he felt he deserved. The gentle tone, the feigned concern. It was more brutal than any public accusation, more painful than any shouted insult. It was a calm, quiet psychological erasure. He was telling me that my reality was not real, that my memory was a fiction, and that my only hope was to surrender to his version of the truth. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing of the boy I loved. I saw only the cold, hard reflection of his own ambition. I turned and walked away without another word, his pitying gaze burning into my back. That was the second obstacle, and it was a wall of his own making, built with the bricks of my love and mortared with his lies. I spent the next 2 days in a gray haze. The conversation with Mark had been more devastating than I could have imagined. He had taken my reality and turned it inside out. How could I fight a man who could so calmly and lovingly convince me I was insane? The legal path was blocked by my own signature. The personal path was blocked by his masterful manipulation. I was trapped. I called Arthur again, the cheap phone feeling like a conduit to my only ally. I told him what Mark had said, my voice flat and defeated. Gaslighting, Arthur grunted. A classic tactic of the abuser. He's isolating you, Gianna, making you doubt your own sanity so you don't fight back. It's a common defense in these cases. But it's effective, I said hollowly. What judge would believe me? A confused old woman, as he so kindly puts it, against a devoted, caring son? He has the documents, Arthur. He has the story. All I have is the truth, and he's telling me it's a lie. He's right about one thing, Arthur admitted, and his words were a punch to the gut. Proving coercion or diminished capacity 5 years after the fact. With no other evidence, it's nearly impossible. It becomes a he said, she said situation, and the legal documents will almost always win. We're at a dead end, Gianna. I'm so sorry. A dead end. The words echoed in the small room. A dead end in a life that had once been so full of open roads and endless possibilities. I ended the call, the feeling of utter hopelessness a suffocating weight. I sat on the bed staring at the blank wall, and let the despair wash over me. This was it. This was the rest of my life. A guest in my own home, a ward of my own son, living on a $20 allowance until I finally faded away. I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes, the late afternoon sun was slanting through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My gaze fell upon an old, framed photograph on the nightstand, the only personal item I had insisted on keeping in this room. It was a picture of Marco and me, taken on the day they broke ground for Willow Creek. We were standing in a field of mud, wearing hard hats, a roll of blueprints tucked under his arm. We were both grinning, our faces smudged with dirt, our eyes shining with the thrill of creation. And then another memory surfaced. Not a gentle one, but a sharp, specific echo from that very day. It had started to rain, and we had taken shelter in his truck. He was tapping on the rain-streaked window, looking out at the first foundation being poured. He'd turned to me, his expression uncharacteristically serious. He had been talking about the future, about legacy, about the what-ifs of a life that would one day end. Listen to me, Gianna, he'd said, his voice low and intense. Things can get complicated. People change. If you ever find yourself in a corner, if you ever feel like you've lost the way, if you ever need the key to our kingdom, look for the first stone we laid together. The key to our kingdom. The first stone we laid together. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a map. My heart began to beat again, a slow, heavy, powerful rhythm. I knew exactly which stone he meant. It wasn't the first foundation poured for a house. It was a personal ceremonial stone we had placed ourselves, long before the construction crews arrived in full force. A private ritual between the creator and her partner. It was the decorative cornerstone of the Willow Creek Community Clubhouse, set at the base of the eastern wall, facing the sunrise. It was a beautiful piece of granite, and Marco had arranged for a secret to be carved into its face, a gift just for me. My initials GB, intertwined with a single stylized rose, the secret signature of the project's hidden architect. No one else knew its significance. It was just a pretty carving to them. To me, it was Marco's enduring acknowledgement of my work, my vision. And now it was something more. It was a clue. The third obstacle, the dead end, wasn't a wall after all. It was a locked door, and Marco had left me the key. My hand, no longer trembling, reached for the burner phone. I dialed Arthur's number. "Vance," he answered, his voice weary. "Arthur, it's me," I said, and my voice was different now. It wasn't the voice of a victim. It was the voice of an architect. "We are not at a dead end." "Gianna? What are you talking about? I told you legally." "Forget the power of attorney for a moment," I said, cutting him off with a newfound authority. "Forget proving coercion. We're going to look for a different kind of proof. Marco left me something." I could hear the skepticism in his silence. "Left you what, Gianna? A letter? A journal? A key?" I said, my voice low and steady. "Arthur," Marco used to say, "if you ever need the key to our kingdom, look for the first stone we laid together." I described the cornerstone to him in meticulous detail. Its precise location, the type of granite, the way the morning sun hit it. I described the engraving of the rose, a secret between my husband and me. I was no longer a confused old woman. I was a designer reciting a blueprint from memory. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could picture Arthur in his office, leaning back in his leather chair, stroking his chin. He had known Marco for 30 years. He knew his friend's love for intricacy, for puzzles, for building safeguards into everything he did. "The clubhouse cornerstone," he said slowly, his voice no longer skeptical, but filled with a dawning curiosity. "The one with the little flower on it. I remember. I thought it was just a flourish." "It was never just a flourish, Arthur," I said. "Nothing Marco did was ever just a flourish. It's a signpost. And I'm going to follow it." The gentle earthquake had begun. A fissure was running through the foundation of my prison, and I was about to break it wide open. The performance began the next morning. It was surprisingly easy to slip into the role they had already cast for me. The humiliation of the barbecue had been a public dress rehearsal. Now I was ready for the main stage. I became the woman Chloe described to her friends on the phone, the one Mark spoke of with a heavy, performative sigh. I let my shoulders slump, my spine curve into a question mark. The sharp, analytical gaze I had inherited from my father, the one that could spot a flaw in a blueprint from 50 paces, became vacant and cloudy. It started at the breakfast table. Chloe placed a bowl of lukewarm, watery oatmeal in front of me, while she and Mark feasted on avocado toast with perfectly poached eggs and fresh fruit. The clink of their sterling silver against ceramic was a stark contrast to the dull scrape of my plastic spoon against the cheap bowl. I didn't object. Instead, I looked up at Chloe, my brow furrowed in manufactured confusion. "Chloe, dear," I began, my voice a quavering, reedy thing I hadn't used in years. "I've been thinking about your lovely bracelet. I am so terribly sorry. My mind is just not what it used to be. I get so muddled." Chloe stopped mid-bite, her fork hovering in the air. She exchanged a look with Mark over my head. It was a glance I had come to know intimately, a silent communication filled with smug victory and condescending pity. It said, "See? I told you. The old woman is broken. We've won." She placed her fork down and reached across the table, patting my hand with a touch that was meant to look like affection but felt like a brand. "Oh, Gianna, don't you worry your pretty little head about it," she cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We know you didn't mean it. It's not your fault. We've already found it. It had just fallen behind a cushion. You see? No harm done." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, but I let my face relax into a mask of pathetic relief. "Oh, thank goodness." I whispered, letting a real tear born of cold fury, well up in my eye. I was so worried. You're a good girl, Chloe. Such a good girl to look after me. She positively beamed, soaking in the praise, the absolute power. Mark cleared his throat. It's fine, Mom. Just try to be a bit more careful, okay? We worry about you. He was trying to sound concerned, the dutiful son, but all I could hear was the impatience underneath, the desire for this inconvenient conversation to be over so he could get back to his perfect life. The days that followed were a masterclass in self-effacement. I shuffled when I walked, my feet barely leaving the floor. I would stand in the middle of a room, looking around with a lost expression until Chloe or Mark would steer me toward a chair, as if I were a piece of furniture to be repositioned. I spent hours staring at the television, the screen reflecting a flickering, colorful emptiness back into my equally empty eyes. But behind the facade, my mind was a fortress of activity. While they saw a doddering old woman watching daytime television, I was rebuilding the blueprints of my life, brick by meticulous brick. I was calculating angles, measuring loads, and planning the demolition of theirs. They grew bolder, more careless. Their whispered conversations in the kitchen became louder, less guarded. I would be sitting in the living room, a forgotten relic, and hear Chloe complaining about the cost of my upkeep, followed by Mark's placating murmurs. They discussed their weekend trips to the wine country, their new car, Chloe's latest designer handbag, all while I sat there, the invisible woman whose pension was funding their lavish lifestyle. They thought their problem was contained, quarantined within my aging mind and body. They had built a comfortable cage around me, and believed I had forgotten how to see the bars. They had no idea I was the one who had designed the entire zoo, and I was about to reclaim the master key. The foundation of their world was about to crack, and the tremor would begin with me. The waiting was the hardest part. I had to let enough time pass for my performance to become their reality. I needed them to be so utterly convinced of my decline that my absence for a few hours in the middle of the night would be unthinkable. For 2 weeks I was the perfect ghost in their machine. I ate their cold leftovers without complaint. I washed their fine china while they streamed movies in the living room. I allowed Chloe to pick out my clothes, drab, shapeless things that made me look even more faded and frail. Each small indignity was a log on the fire of my resolve. Each condescending pat on the head was a hammer blow, not breaking me, but forging my will into something harder than steel. The night I chose was moonless, the sky a blanket of starless inky black. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable. Mark and Chloe had gone to a lavish dinner with friends, returning late, flush with wine and self-satisfaction. I listened from my room as their footsteps stumbled up the stairs, followed by their muffled laughter and the click of their bedroom door. I lay in my bed, fully clothed under the thin blanket, and listened to the house settle. I tracked the sounds, the groan of the pipes as the dishwasher finished its cycle, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of traffic on the main road. I waited until the digital clock on my bedside table, the one they'd given me with numbers large enough for my failing eyes, read 2 a.m. Silence. A deep, profound quiet that meant they were truly asleep, lost in dreams of their own importance. I slid out of bed. My movements were no longer the shuffle of a frail old woman, but the silent, deliberate steps of a predator. I was dressed in dark gray sweatpants and a black long-sleeved shirt. In my youth, I had climbed scaffolding on Marco's construction sites. I knew how to move without making a sound. My target was the community clubhouse, the very heart of Willow Creek, a building I knew better than the back of my own hand because I had drawn every line of it myself. In the garage, I retrieved the tools, not from Mark's shiny, organized toolbox, but from my own forgotten corner. An old wooden crate held my personal treasures, my favorite gardening trowel, its wooden handle worn smooth by my own hands, and a small flat pry bar, perfect for delicate work. These were the tools of a creator, a builder. Tonight, they would be the tools of an archaeologist, digging up a past that was about to become the present. The night air was cool and damp. The manicured lawns of Willow Creek were slick with dew, muffling my footsteps. The houses were all dark, their occupants sleeping soundly, unaware of the tectonic shift that was about to occur beneath their feet. They saw themselves as owners, as masters of their domains. They had no idea they were all just tenants in my kingdom. The clubhouse stood silhouetted against the faint glow of the city lights on the horizon. It was a beautiful building, designed with clean lines and natural materials, a testament to a style of architecture that valued harmony and endurance. I felt a pang of pride, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself in years. Marco's name was on the dedication plaque, but my soul was in the stonework. I went to the northeast corner, the place where the building first met the earth. There, just as I remembered, was the cornerstone. It wasn't a grand, ostentatious block. It was a simple, elegant piece of dressed granite, slightly different in texture from the stones around it. To the casual observer, it was a minor aesthetic detail. But to me it was a signpost. Marco and I had placed it together on a sunny afternoon 35 years ago. I remembered the feel of the cool stone under my hands, the scent of fresh mortar, the look in his eyes as he'd said, "For our legacy, Gianna, the key to our kingdom," etched subtly into the bottom edge, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, was a small stylized rose, my symbol. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a cold, thrilling anticipation. I knelt on the damp grass, my old knees protesting, but I ignored the pain. I ran my fingers over the familiar grooves of the mortar. I knew its composition, its weaknesses. With the tip of the trowel I began to scrape, carefully, methodically. The mortar flaked away, falling like sand onto the dark earth. It was slow, painstaking work. My hands, though old, were steady. They remembered the feel of stone and steel, the delicate balance of pressure and precision. After 20 minutes of patient work, I had cleared a deep enough groove. I slid the tip of the pry bar into the gap. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and applied steady pressure. For a moment nothing happened. Then, with a soft, grinding scrape that sounded deafening in the silence, the cornerstone shifted. It came loose, heavy and solid in my hands. I carefully set it aside on the grass. Behind it was a small, perfectly square hollow lined with thick, dull gray lead. And nestled inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was the reason for my midnight excursion. It was a small, heavy box made of what looked like solid lead. Inside it lay two objects. The first was an ornate brass key, its head shaped like the Bellini family crest. It was heavy, a key to something significant, something built to last. The second was a small, laminated card, the kind used for identification. On it, printed in simple block letters, was a 32-character alphanumeric code. I closed my eyes for a second, clutching the key and the card in my hand. The cold metal felt like a direct link to Marco, a message sent across the years. "I'm here, Marco," I thought. "I haven't forgotten. I will protect our foundation." I slid the key and card into my pocket, replaced the cornerstone, and used a bit of loose soil to mask the fresh scrapes in the mortar. By morning, the dew would settle the dust, and no one would ever know I had been there. I was a ghost, leaving no trace. As I walked back to the house I was forced to call home, the first hint of dawn was beginning to bruise the eastern sky. A new day was coming. The next morning I called Arthur Vance from the burner phone I'd bought with my $20 allowance. I didn't dare use the house line. I assumed Chloe monitored the calls. Arthur's voice was exactly as I remembered it. Dry, precise, and imbued with an unshakable loyalty that was a rare commodity. "Gianna? My God, is that you? I haven't heard from you in an age." "It's me, Arthur," I said, my voice low and steady. "I need to see you. Today. It's about Marco's work." There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp legal mind. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He simply said, "My office. 11 a.m. The back in trance. Getting out of the house was the next challenge. I employed my newfound frailty. At the breakfast table, while listlessly pushing my cold oatmeal around my bowl, I let out a soft sigh. "You know," I said, looking at a point somewhere over Chloe's left shoulder, "I think I might try to walk to the little library down by the park. Get some fresh air. My old bones are so stiff." Chloe looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed with annoyance. The little library was a free book-sharing box 4 blocks away. It was a harmless, senile old lady errand. "Are you sure you'll be all right, Gianna?" she asked, the feigned concern barely masking her irritation at the inconvenience. You get so confused. Oh, I'll be fine, I said with a vacant smile. I'll just take it slow. It's a lovely day. I'll drive you, Mom, Mark offered, ever the dutiful son. No, no, I insisted, waving a dismissive hand. The walk will do me good. Don't you trouble yourselves. It was exactly the right thing to say. The last thing they wanted was to be troubled. They watched me shuffle out the door, my handbag clutched in my hand, and I knew they felt a sense of relief. The problem was taking itself for a walk. I walked 2 blocks in the direction of the park, moving at a glacial pace. Then, once I was out of sight of the house, I turned a corner, my posture straightened, and my pace quickened. I walked another 2 blocks to a bus stop and took a crosstown bus that dropped me 3 blocks from Arthur's downtown office. Arthur Vance looked older, his hair more silver, his face more lined, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He led me into a wood-paneled conference room that smelled of old books and strong coffee. It's good to see you, Gianna, he said, his professional demeanor softening for a moment. But I suspect this isn't a social call. I didn't waste time. I placed the ornate brass key and the laminated card on the polished mahogany table between us. Marco left these for me, I said. He told me they were the key to our kingdom. Arthur picked up the key, his eyebrows rising. I recognize this. It's for a private safe deposit box at the First National Heritage Bank. It's not under your name or Marco's. It's under a corporate holding entity. He then looked at the card with the code. And this looks like a digital access key. Let's go. The bank was an imposing marble edifice, a temple dedicated to money and secrets. The air was cool and hushed. Arthur handled the formalities, his presence commanding respect. We were let deep into the vault, a world of polished steel and silent tumblers. The bank officer, a stern-faced woman, used her key and then the brass one I had brought. With a heavy, satisfying thud, a long, narrow box slid out. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the culmination of Marco's planning and my quiet rebellion. The officer slid the box into a private viewing room and left us, closing the door softly behind her. For a moment, neither of us moved. Whatever is in here, Gianna, Arthur said gently, we'll face it together. I nodded, my hands trembling slightly. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there was no stack of bearer bonds, no deeds, no thick envelopes of cash. There was only a single leather-bound ledger. It was disappointingly simple. I opened it. The pages were filled with Marco's familiar, precise handwriting, detailing transactions, dates, and corporate filings. At the front on the first page was a name, Bellini Foundations LLC. Arthur pulled a slim, high-security laptop from his briefcase. All right, he said, his voice all business. Let's see what the second part of this puzzle unlocks. He powered it on, navigated to a secure portal I didn't recognize, and was met with a single login field. He carefully typed in the 32-character code from the laminated card. He hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single file appeared on the screen. A PDF document. It was hundreds of pages long. Arthur clicked it open. He started to scroll, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. He was a fast reader, but he slowed, then stopped. He scrolled back up. He read a passage again. The silence in the small, sterile room was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the ventilation. A full minute passed. Arthur didn't move a muscle, his eyes fixed on the screen. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement, as if he were afraid of shattering the air around him. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture of profound shock I had never seen from him before. He looked at me, and his eyes were wide with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher: awe, disbelief, and a dawning ferocious respect. My God, Gianna, he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, looking from me to the screen and back again. My God, you don't have a nest egg. You are the goddamn nest. He turned the laptop toward me. Marco was a genius. Paranoid, brilliant, Machiavellian genius. He didn't just put your name on the deeds to your house. He put the deeds to everything in your name. He structured it over years through a series of trusts and corporate shells. You are the sole trustee and one unanimous, 100% owner of Bellini Foundations LLC. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. And Bellini Foundations LLC, Gianna. It's the corporation that owns every square inch of land in every single 99-year leasehold in the entirety of the Willow Creek Estates development. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The cold leftovers, the plastic spoons, the condescending pats on the head, the public humiliation. All of it collapsed in on itself, crushed under the weight of this revelation. I wasn't a guest in my son's house. He was a tenant in mine. They all were. Chloe with her smug superiority and sapphire bracelet. The neighbors who had watched me be shamed with pity and suspicion. Every single one of them. They weren't homeowners. They were renters. And I, Gianna Bellini, the forgotten relic, the senile old woman. I was their landlord. The room was silent, but in my head, a gavel was coming down. Hard. The email arrived with the digital finality of a court summons. The subject line, in stark, unforgiving capital letters, read, Mandatory Emergency HOA Meeting. My son Mark read it aloud from his phone, his voice laced with a familiar, easy annoyance. Topic: Urgent review of property covenants and leasehold agreements. Chloe scoffed from the kitchen island where she was scrolling through a designer handbag website on her tablet. The sound was a little puff of air, a dismissal of anything that might inconvenience her for more than 5 seconds. Honestly, she said, not looking up. It's probably about Mrs. Gable's lawn gnomes again. That woman and her ceramic army. So tacky. Mark chuckled, a hollow sound that always seemed to be in service of his wife's moods. Right? Still, it says mandatory. Guess we have to go. Chloe finally looked up, her perfectly glossed lips tightening into a thin, performative smile. Her eyes, however, landed on me. I was sitting in my designated armchair, the one with the slightly worn fabric that they'd relegated to the corner of the living room, pretending to be engrossed in a book whose words I hadn't registered for the past hour. You're coming with us, Gianna, she declared. It wasn't a question or an invitation. It was an order wrapped in the guise of concern. She turned her smile to Mark, a signal for him to back her play. We can't just leave you here alone. You might forget the stove is on and set the house on fire. The lie was so practiced, so smooth, it slid into the air between us without a ripple. I was a licensed architect who had overseen the structural and fire safety compliance for a dozen commercial buildings, but in this house I was a doddering liability. Played my part. I looked up from my book, a flicker of carefully manufactured confusion on my face. Oh, a meeting? Of course, dear. Whatever you think is best. The walk to the community clubhouse was a parade of quiet suburban hypocrisy. The evening was warm, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine, a fragrance I had personally specified in the original landscaping blueprints. The automatic sprinklers I had designed hissed in a synchronized rhythm, casting rainbows in the dying sun. Every lawn was a perfect emerald rectangle, every home a monument to the comfortable, orderly life I had envisioned. A life I no longer lived. Mark walked on one side of me, his hand on my elbow, a grip that felt less like support and more like a guard's hold. Chloe glided on my other side, nodding and smiling at neighbors we passed. Hi, Carol. See you at the meeting, she'd call out, her voice bright and saccharine. To them, we were the perfect family, the dutiful son and daughter-in-law, tenderly caring for their aging mother. They couldn't see the coldness in Mark's touch, or the contempt in Chloe's eyes every time she glanced at me to make sure I wasn't stumbling. Inside the clubhouse, a building I had designed with soaring wood beams and a grand stone fireplace, the air was thick with tension and expensive perfume. Nearly every resident of Willow Creek was there, their faces a mixture of irritation and curiosity. Chloe, ever the performer, led me directly to the front row. She made a show of helping me into a chair, patting my shoulder with a flourish of maternal care for the benefit of the audience. There you go, Gianna. You'll have a good view from here. They took their seats on either side of me, a human cage. I settled in, letting my posture slump, my hands tremble just so in my lap. I was their prop, a visual testament to their supposed burden. I felt Chloe's smug satisfaction radiating off her like heat. She thought she had me perfectly contained. She had no idea that she was the one in the cage, and the walls were about to close in. I looked at the stage, at the empty podium, and felt a cold, clean calm settle in my bones. The calm of an architect reviewing the final plans just before the demolition charge is detonated. It was time. The room quieted as a man in a sharply tailored gray suit walked onto the stage. He was tall, with silvering hair and an air of unflappable authority. He placed a leather briefcase on the podium and opened it with methodical precision. He was a stranger to everyone in this room except for me. Arthur Vance. My husband Marco's lawyer and now mine. "Good evening," Arthur began, his voice calm and resonant, easily filling the large room without a microphone. "Thank you for your prompt attendance. My name is Arthur Vance. I am the chief counsel for an entity called Bellini Foundations LLC. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Chloe lean toward Mark, her brow furrowed. "Bellini," she whispered, the name a strange and unfamiliar sound on her tongue. "Isn't that?" She glanced at me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes, before dismissing the thought. To her, Bellini was just my last name, a relic from a past she had no interest in. It couldn't possibly mean anything. "Bellini Foundations," Arthur continued, letting the name hang in the air for a moment, "is the sole ownership entity for the development you know as Willow Creek. We are here tonight because a recent clerical audit of the original land grants and property covenants has revealed a widespread misunderstanding among the residents regarding the nature of your property agreements." The word misunderstanding sent a jolt through the room. The casual annoyance of the residents began to sharpen into focused concern. People sat up straighter. Phones were put away. Arthur paused, letting the weight of his next words gather. He looked out over the sea of anxious, affluent faces, his expression impassive. "To be clear," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate, "the documents you signed upon moving into your homes were not deeds of sale in the traditional sense. You are not homeowners." Panic erupted. A collective gasp, followed by a cacophony of angry, disbelieving voices. "What is he talking about? That's impossible. I have a deed." Arthur held up a hand, and the sheer force of his calm presence slowly quelled the outburst. "You possess," he clarified, his voice cutting through the remaining noise, "what is legally defined as a leasehold. You are, in fact, tenants on a 99-year land lease. Bellini Foundations LLC retains full and legal ownership of the land and the physical structures upon it." The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than the noise it replaced. It was the silence of dawning horror. The silence of people whose entire net worth, whose entire sense of security and status, had just been vaporized by a few sentences from a man in a gray suit. And then a single voice shattered it. "This is insane." Chloe was on her feet, her face a mask of crimson fury. Her carefully constructed facade of the graceful, in-control suburban queen had crumbled to dust. This wasn't about lawn gnomes. This was about her house, her status, her investment. "We own our home. We have a mortgage. We paid for it. Who is this mysterious owner? Who is this Bellini Foundations? Who is the trustee?" Her voice rose with each question, becoming a shrill, hysterical demand that echoed off the high wooden beams I had designed. She was pointing at Arthur, her finger trembling with rage. She had become the voice of the mob, and everyone was watching her, their own panic mirrored in her furious face. Arthur Vance watched Chloe's tirade without a flicker of emotion. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving, he allowed a thin, almost imperceptible smile to touch his lips. He let her desperate questions hang in the charged air, amplifying their weight, ensuring every single person in the room was listening. "An excellent question, Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice dropping back to that same, unervingly calm tone. He turned his head slightly, as if considering the best way to answer. The entire room held its breath, a collective stillness of 100 people on the edge of a cliff. "The sole trustee of Bellini Foundations LLC," Arthur continued slowly, deliberately, "is in fact in attendance tonight." A new wave of murmurs swept through the room, this time laced with suspicion and confusion. head swiveled, eyes darting from one neighbor to the next. Who was it? The retired tech CEO in the back? The investment banker from Lot 22? No one looked at the frail old woman in the front row. I was invisible. I was scenery. Arthur let the suspense build for another perfect, agonizing beat. Then he turned. His movement was not dramatic, but it was precise. He extended his arm, not pointing, but gesturing with an open, respectful hand toward the front row. Toward me. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a deep respect for my late husband, and a profound satisfaction in the moment we now shared. She is the woman, Arthur announced, his voice now carrying a new steely edge. You recently and very publicly accused of theft in front of half the people in this room. Every eye in the clubhouse followed his gesture. One by one, the gazes of my neighbors fell upon me. I saw their confusion, their disbelief. I saw the gears turning in their minds, trying to reconcile the image of the dotty old woman with the words of the powerful lawyer. And then I saw Chloe's face. Her mouth was slightly agape. The furious color had drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. Her eyes were wide, not with anger now, but with a dawning, soul-shattering horror. The look on her face was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated shock. Arthur's voice delivered the final, devastating blow. Miss Gianna Bellini, would you please stand? Slowly I rose from my chair. It felt as though I was shedding a heavy, suffocating cloak I had been forced to wear for years. The feigned frailty fell away. The practiced tremble in my hands ceased. My spine straightened inch by inch until I was standing at my full height. I was not the stooped, shuffling creature they had made me. I was the architect of this place. I was its foundation. I lifted my chin and met Chloe's horrified gaze. There was no anger in my eyes. No malice. Only a calm, steady, unbreakable certainty. A silence so absolute had fallen over the room that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning units I had specified 2 decades ago. In that silence, a new sound emerged. It began as a whisper, a rustle of comprehension as the pieces clicked into place for everyone. The public humiliation at the barbecue, Chloe's performative concern, the sudden, inexplicable meeting. It all made a new, terrible kind of sense. The whispers turned to snickers. I saw Mrs. Gable, the owner of the Lawn Gnomes, cover her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with a delicious, scandalous understanding. Then came the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Click. It was the sharp, distinct sound of a neighbor's phone camera. Someone was taking a picture of Chloe's face, frozen in a mask of utter ruin. The humiliation was absolute, a perfect mirrored reflection of the one she had tried to inflict on me. And this time it was not mine. The morning after the meeting dawned with a cruel, indifferent clarity. Sunlight, sharp and white, sliced through the oversized windows of the house I designed but no longer felt welcome in. The silence was different now. It wasn't the strained, oppressive silence of before, thick with unspoken resentment. It was a hollow, empty silence, the kind that follows a storm, where the air is still and waiting. I was in the kitchen, making myself a proper cup of coffee with the expensive machine Chloe had always claimed was too complicated for me to use, when the doorbell chimed. It was a crisp, formal sound, not the casual ring of a neighbor. I heard Chloe's hurried footsteps on the marble floor, then the click of the heavy front door opening. Her voice was a syrupy performance of politeness. Yes? Can I help you? A man's voice, professional and detached, replied. Courier for Mark Evans and Chloe Evans. There was a rustle of paper, the scrape of a pen on a clipboard, and the door clicked shut again. I sipped my coffee. It was rich and dark, a small, perfect pleasure. Chloe walked into the kitchen, holding a large, stiff manila envelope. She tossed it onto the granite island with a dismissive flick of her wrist. More junk from some legal firm. Probably trying to sell us estate planning. Mark trudged in, his face puffy from a restless night. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. Who was it? Just a courier, Chloe said, pulling a tub of Greek yogurt from the refrigerator. Something for you. Mark picked up the envelope. His brow furrowed as he saw the letterhead. printed in a severe elegant font. Bellini Foundations LLC. His hands, I noticed, were trembling slightly as he tore it open. He pulled out a sheaf of thick cream-colored paper, bound by a single formidable staple. He read the first page, his face draining of all color. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting back and forth across the page like a trapped animal. "What is it, Mark?" Chloe asked, her spoon hovering over her yogurt. "You look like you've seen a ghost." It's a lease agreement," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He held the document out to her. Chloe snatched it from him, her irritation clear. "A lease? What are you talking about? We own this house." Her eyes scanned the first page, and her casual annoyance curdled into shocked disbelief. Her mouth fell open. $15,000? Her voice cracked on the last word. "A month? This is insane. This has to be a mistake. She can't do this." I took another slow sip of my coffee, watching them over the rim of my mug. The warmth of the ceramic felt good in my hands. "Keep reading," I said, my voice even and quiet. Mark's gaze snapped to me, filled with a confused mix of fear and anger. Chloe, however, was already devouring the next page, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She found the section she was looking for, the one I had taken particular care in drafting with Arthur the night before. She began to read aloud, her voice shaking with a rage that was rapidly overpowering her shock. Community Bylaws, Article 12, Addendum. She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. Effective immediately for all residents of the Willow Creek residential community. Any verified act of elder abuse, financial exploitation, or public defamation by a resident against a family member residing within the same household will result in immediate and non-negotiable termination of the lease agreement. She slammed the papers down on the counter. The sound echoed in the cavernous kitchen. "You witch!" she shrieked, her carefully constructed mask of sophistication shattering into 1,000 pieces. "You planned this. All of it." Mark finally found his voice, a desperate, pleading tone. "Mom, please. We need to talk about this. This isn't you. That lawyer Arthur, he's putting these ideas in your head. You're confused." I set my mug down gently on the counter, the click of porcelain on stone the only sound for a long moment. I walked from the kitchen into the grand living room, the one where they held their parties, the one where I was paraded as a senile accessory. I sat down in the large, plush armchair by the fireplace, the one I had specifically chosen for its comfort and view of the garden, the one they had tacitly forbidden me from using. The fabric was soft beneath my fingers. I waited. They followed me in, a storm of desperation and fury. They stood before me like defendants before a judge. "You can't do this to us," Mark began, his voice trying for reason but failing. "This is my home. Our home. We built this life." "My land, Mark," I corrected him softly. "You built your life on my land with my money. There's a difference." Chloe started to cry then. Fat, theatrical tears rolled down her cheeks, the kind she'd used to great effect at the barbecue. "Gianna, how could you be so cruel? We're your family. After everything we've done for you. Taking you in when you had nowhere else to go." The lie was so audacious, so familiar, that I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The emotional fog I had lived in for years was completely gone, burned away by the harsh light of truth. I let her finish, let them both exhaust their practiced arguments, their manipulations, their pathetic attempts to reclaim the power they'd lost. They begged. They pleaded. Mark even tried to threaten, talking about getting his own lawyers, about proving I was incompetent, but the words died on his lips. We all knew it was an empty threat. The proof of my competence was all around us, in the very structure of the house, the community, the legal fortress Marco and I had built. When they finally fell silent, their faces streaked with a mixture of real and fake tears, their chests heaving, I looked from one to the other. I saw not my son and his wife, but two strangers who had tried to erase me. I leaned forward slightly in the chair. "Are you finished?" My voice was devoid of the emotion they were so desperately trying to provoke. There was no anger, no hatred, no triumph. There was only the quiet finality of a closed door. You said you wanted to manage my assets. I continued, my gaze fixed on Mark. You were so eager to take control, to handle everything because I was supposedly incapable. Well, here's your opportunity. You can now manage your rent payments. I turned my head to look at Chloe, whose crying had subsided into hiccuping sobs. $15,000 a month is the current market rate for a property of this size in a community of this quality. The one I designed. It seems only fair. Mark took a step forward. Mom, we can't afford that. You know we can't. Where would we go? I let the silence stretch, letting his question hang in the air between us. I let him remember all the times I had to eat leftovers, all the times I was given a $20 allowance like a child, all the times Chloe had complained about the cost of my existence while showing off a new designer handbag. You have 30 days to sign the new lease, I said, my voice as unyielding as the foundation of the house. If you do not, a 30-day notice to vacate will be posted on that very expensive front door. The choice is yours. A flicker of something desperate and wild crossed Chloe's face. We'll move into the garage apartment. We converted it, it's ours. I looked at her, and for the first time, I allowed a flicker of the cold steel I now felt to show in my eyes. The garage, I said slowly and clearly, is no longer an option. That afternoon, I moved my few belongings into the master bedroom. The process took less than an hour. As I placed my worn copy of Palladios, the 4 books of architecture on the nightstand, I looked around the room. It was a beautiful space, with a balcony overlooking the willow trees that gave the community its name. The light was soft, the air was still. The silence in the house was no longer hollow. It was peaceful. It was mine. A month passed, not in a blur, but in a series of deliberate, quiet moments. The house was no longer filled with the sound of Mark's booming conference calls or Chloe's fake, tinkling laughter with her friends by the pool. It was just quiet. They were ghosts in my house, tiptoeing around, their hushed, frantic arguments a constant whisper behind closed doors. They had not yet signed the lease. I didn't spend my days there, though. The community clubhouse, the very first building Marco and I had placed the cornerstone for, was now my office. I'd spend my mornings on its expansive, wrap-around porch, a thermos of dark coffee beside me. Spread before me, on a large drafting table, were not blueprints for another sprawling mansion. They were plans for something new, something different, to be built on an adjacent plot of land that Bellini Foundations also owned. The designs were for a state-of-the-art assisted living facility, integrated with a vibrant community center, a place of dignity, creativity, and connection. A place where people would be seen, not hidden away. My phone, a new smartphone Arthur had insisted I get, buzzed on the table. It was a notification from a news app, but the headline linked to a social media platform I barely understood. The video it showed was grainy, shot on a phone from across the community hall. It was a short, looping clip of Chloe's face, captured in the exact moment Arthur introduced me as the sole owner of Willow Creek. I watched it once, the perfect mask of smug condescension cracking, crumbling into a mosaic of pure, undiluted horror. Her eyes wide, her mouth agape, a monument to a public humiliation she had so carefully designed for me. The caption read, "Karen-in-law gets a reality check." The view count below it had just ticked past 10 million. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. It wasn't a smile of vengeance, but of closure. A quiet acknowledgement that the world had seen the truth. I closed the app, took a deep breath of the clean morning air and picked up my pencil. I spent my life building houses for other people, monuments to their wealth and status. Now I would build a home for myself and for others like me on my own foundation.